All right. Now we're going to talk about the three A's of computer security. Before we get to what the three A's are and how they're related to each other, first let's talk a little bit about a very important overarching principle related to basically all of computer security, which is these trade offs. And it's not just computer security, it's pretty much all security. There is always a trade off between security and convenience. If you want more security, you're going to have less convenience. Now, just because something is less convenient doesn't necessarily mean that it's more secure, but in order to get more security, almost every time you're going to have to lower the convenience. And a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today are going to illustrate that principle, especially when we talk about authentication. Now, to really drive this home, I guess you could think about an example of possibly the most convenient computer system ever is one in which I don't have to have a password. I just sit down at the computer and log in, and I can get access to every file all the time without any problems. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is that anybody can sit down and get access to any file without any problems, and that's less secure. Same would be the most convenient access point is an open, unencrypted wireless access point. Well, that's super insecure. And to provide security, adding passwords or some sort of authentication to that wireless network reduces the convenience. So watch out for that. It's always a trade-off between security and convenience. Now, the three A's, with maybe a fourth A, depending on who you talk to, are authentication, authorization, and accounting, and maybe auditing. Auditing and accounting, they're very related. Some places might replace auditing with accounting. So, authentication, verifying that someone is who they claim to be. Now, the way that we normally do that is with a username and a password, because that's a very fantastic way to verify that someone is who they claim to be. As long as their password is a secret, and as long as their password is a good password, then only that one person should know it, and they can verify then with that password that they are who they claim to be. Now, what makes a good password? A good password is unique, and there's an XKCD comic there about unique passwords, and the importance of that, and we'll talk about that. A good password is long. Another XKCD comic about the importance of a long password. You don't want to have a common phrase password like I love you, and we'll look at the top 100 Adobe passwords, and we'll look at another list. There's a bunch of links here to resources on what the most common passwords are. So here's the Adobe list. Here's the top 25 passwords in Adobe's list of passwords. And this was a major security breach a while back, and Adobe did not have good password security, and they encrypted their passwords instead of hashing them, which meant that once someone cracked it, they were able to figure out what all of the passwords were. So this entire database of Adobe passwords was compromised. And here's the top: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Password, Adobe 1, 2, 3. Those are pretty obvious passwords, and if you were going to do a dictionary attack on passwords, guess what's going to be at the top of your dictionary? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Adobe 1, 2, 3. QWERTY. Photoshop. You know, you're going to put common words and common passwords at the top of your list, including the password, which is currently number 3 on that list of most common passwords. Now here, from another list, is the top 10,000 passwords from a variety of security breaches. The number 1 password is password, followed closely by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you think about why does it stop at 8 and why not just go to 9, well, a lot of places require that you have an 8-character password. So if I have to get to 8 characters, the fastest way to get there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that list goes on and on and on. If you Google top 10,000 passwords, they'll give you the list. You can even download the raw data and have a list of 10,000 passwords if you want to. It's very interesting to look at. So have I been, I don't know how to pronounce that, owned? Have I been owned.com is a list it's a website and it's a service that allows you to take your email address and you put in your email address, and they look through all of the basically released account compromises, including the Adobe one, and they'll tell you if your email address was found as an account in a compromised database. Now, some of those compromises didn't actually compromise the passwords. If the companies had good password security, if they had salts and hashes, then the only thing compromised was that salt and the hash. So they may not have actually compromised your password. But if you were in, for example, the Adobe hack, then somebody else out there has your Adobe password. And that really emphasizes why your password needs to be unique. Because if you use the same password for Adobe that you use for your email, that you use for your bank, that you use for anything else, well, your email address is associated with that. And if I compromise Adobe and I say, hey, look, I've got this email address of whatever at example.com, well, let's check Facebook and see if whatever at example.com using the same password has the same account. And we can get a Facebook account. Or let's check Gmail or Hotmail or Yahoo or Wells Fargo. And by checking all of these places, you're able to compromise people in a whole bunch of places. So this is why you need to have a unique password on every website. Don't use the same password on Google that you use on Facebook. Don't use the same password on either of those that you use for your bank. Don't use the same password on any of those that you use for your Reddit account. None of that. Basically, you don't want any repeat passwords because you don't know how well that organization is handling security. You don't know how well. You'd think Adobe, being a large organization, would have good password security. But guess what? They didn't. And everybody's accounts were compromised. Everybody's passwords were compromised in that hack. Use a unique password, a different password for each website. Next up, the long password. This is that XKCD comic that I linked to before. The important thing to note here, this is an example of a short, what you might think of as a good password. It's randomly mixing in some numbers and letters. It's got some symbols. It's got uppercase and lowercase. Randall Munroe, the guy who makes XKCD, points out that this is a very difficult password to remember, or a more or less difficult password to remember. And really, because it's so short, it's not that hard for a computer to guess it. And a better thing to do is have a significantly longer password. And even if it might be 4 random words, even if it might be all lowercase and have no numbers, what you're going to get out of that is basically a password that's harder for a computer to guess. Now, don't use the password correct horse battery staple, because that is at the top of every dictionary now, or in the top 100 of every dictionary now. But this is an algorithm for generating what is essentially a very long password that's hard for a computer to guess. Now, would it be better? Even better would be a very long password like correct horse battery staple, but with some mixed up numbers and letters and capitals and symbols and things, because that makes it even harder for a computer to guess, but also harder for people to remember. So one way to meet all these rules of a different password for each website and long passwords with random words and characters and symbols and all those things that make passwords good but also make them hard to remember, is using something called a password manager. And there's a lot of them. LastPass just announced that they're now free for mobile and PC. They used to just be free on PC and you'd have to pay a whole $1 a month to use it on a mobile, but now they're free for everybody. So you can have LastPass, you can have KeePass, which is also free, or you can pay for 1Password, and there's a bunch of others. These are the ones that I know off the top of my head. Now, what these are is essentially an encrypted database of all of your passwords. So you use a password to encrypt your passwords, and then once you enter that password, then you can copy and paste your password wherever you need it to do, or you can have it automatically filled. LastPass, for example, has browser plugins that'll automatically fill your passwords on websites. And they will also generate good long passwords for you. So you can not even have to really think about keeping track of all the passwords for all of your accounts or having good passwords for these accounts so that they're hard to compromise just in case Adobe or wherever you're storing your information gets compromised. Now, again, security and convenience. Ideally, in an ideal perfect world, I would have all of my passwords in my head and only in my head, and they would all be 30 to 50 characters of random characters, and I wouldn't have to store them anywhere. So putting them in a password manager makes them more convenient, but it also provides an opportunity for potentially someone to compromise that. So the thing you have to think of is, what is the most likely risk? The most likely risk is probably someone attacking Adobe, or someone attacking Twitter, or someone attacking Facebook, or someone attacking random third-party website that you've signed up for an account with. And if you're reusing that password, then that password is compromised everywhere that it's used. So, for example, potential risk to your password. Someone compromises website X that I visit. Website X doesn't have good password storage protocols, so my password is compromised along with thousands or millions of others. So having a unique password limits that risk. It means if that account is compromised, it's only that account that gets compromised and not all of my accounts, because that's a unique password. I may have accounts other places, but if I have other passwords of other places, whoever hacked website X doesn't have access to that. So another risk, I fall victim to a phishing scheme and enter my password into a fraudulent website. So that could happen. You end up on the wrong website and it looks a lot like your bank and you don't really think about it, and you type in your username and password, and now somebody has your passwords and you think, oh crap, I made a mistake and I know I shouldn't have done that and I did it. And now they have my password. Well, if that's a unique password, then the risk is limited. They've only compromised one account. You can change your password there and you've got no problem. If it's not a unique password, then you have to change your password everywhere. Because again, if I set up a phishing site for your bank and I get your bank password, there's nothing preventing me from trying that same account on Gmail or Yahoo or Dropbox or anywhere else that you might have an account. So the last risk, and the risk of a password manager really is someone really wants my stuff. Now, I think the odds of that are pretty slim. I'm not a very attractive target. You're probably not a very attractive target specifically. Now, again, Adobe is a great target, and you might have an account in there, but the odds that someone is going to specifically choose me out of the billions of people on this earth and say, I really want to get this guy's stuff, is pretty slim. So they really, really want my password, so they target me by trying to break into my account. Now, a good long password is going to make that difficult. So you really, really, really want a good long password. Don't use your birthday. Don't use personal information. Don't use your dog's name. Don't use your first pet's name. All of that information is available somewhere, somehow, and makes it really easy to break into. So use something really long and a good password to make that difficult. And especially if you're going to use something like a password manager, you really want to use a good long password to encrypt your password database. Because if someone gets your password database, well, that's pretty high value target for them, because then if they can break into that, they can break into all your accounts. So really, really, really choose one really, really good password for your password manager. So another risk, someone steals my computer, finds my password database, figures out my password database password, and then has access to all of my accounts. Now that's a lot of bad things that have to happen, and a lot of kind of unlikely things. First, somebody's got to steal my computer. Then they have to get into my computer. Now I'm pretty good about locking my computer, and if you have hard disk encryption, then you're even better off, because then they have to break into that. Odds are it's not worth it. Again, for them, the value of the computer is probably in the computer, and they'd rather just wipe it and sell it than try to break in and steal my information. Then they'd have to break that database password, and then they could have my accounts. Now, again, I don't think that's super likely, but if you use a good password manager and a good password, then you're probably safe even from that, because it should be difficult for them to figure out your password database password. So an important thing to prevent against someone compromising your account by getting your password is something called multi-factor authentication. And multi-factor authentication, a lot of services offer it now. A lot of them. We'll talk about some. But really what it means is it's a combination of multiple things, multiple methods for you to prove your identity. Typically, it starts out with something that you know, like your password. That's an easy one. Other examples of things that you might know are your make and model of your first car and other things like that. So multi-factor authentication starting with something that you know. Another really common one is something that you have. And if I pull out my phone here, I'll even pull it up and show you. Here is multi-factor authentication, and you can see the code for the next 30 seconds to log into my Gmail account. Now, you still have to know my password, but for the next 30 seconds, you would need to know my password and that code. And in 30 seconds, that code's about to change, and it won't do you any good anymore. So I don't feel bad telling you that. So combination of something that you know and something that you have, like your phone or even a separate hardware device that has a code rotating on it. Now, Blizzard sells those because they have multi-factor authentication for their accounts. Another company, RSA, sells tokens that you can hand out to employees to enable multi-factor authentication. And another set of factors that's potentially usable is biometrics. So your fingerprint, your iris, your handprint, your heat signature, your whatever, hair samples, I don't know. There's a lot of different biometric options. And the only problem with biometrics is that you can never change it. So I can change something that I have. If it gets lost, then I can say, okay, or if it gets compromised, if my phone gets compromised, I can say, okay, cancel that. We're going to enable the new device that I now have control of. Same with the password. If somebody else learns my password, I can change that. But it's possible to forge fingerprints, and you can never say, those are no longer my fingerprints. You can't do that. I don't know if it's possible to forge iris scans. I imagine it probably is with contact lenses or something. Same thing. You can never say, that's not my iris, because it is, and it always is, and you can't change out your iris when one iris scan gets compromised. So that's bad. Or a potential weakness of biometrics. Now, biometrics are still really cool. They're oftentimes more convenient than having to remember a password or keep a separate key, but they do have their own limitations. So here's an example. I already showed you one on my phone, but here's an example of a Google Authenticator. And there's that separate key that I was talking about that shows a code, and that code rotates every 30 seconds or so. So some, like Facebook, will do it through a text message, and they'll send you a text message and ask you to confirm. Others have that separate app, or again, that separate key. So places where you might consider enabling two-factor authentication, Dropbox definitely has it, GitHub, Evernote, your Google account, your Microsoft account, your Discord, if you're a gamer, you might want to enable multi-factor authentication there. Now, some of those are high-value targets, right? I definitely have it enabled on my Gmail account, because if somebody gets access to my Gmail account, then that's really bad for me. Almost everything is tied back to my Google account. So definitely add that extra layer of security. And again, we talked about that trade-off. Increased security, decreased convenience. Well, it's definitely less convenient to have to pull out my phone in order to answer or to log into my Gmail account on a new device. But that level of security is definitely increased, because the odds of someone compromising my password, well, that's possible. But the odds of someone compromising my password and getting access to my phone is less likely. And that would come under that targeted attack that is less likely. So summary of authentication, and we spent a lot of time talking about the first A of the 3 A's, and we're going to spend a lot less time talking about the other A's, but that's okay. Authentication is important, and it's one thing that you definitely have control over. So use a good, long, unique password for each website. Use a password manager, and all of the security experts that I know of recommend using a password manager rather than trying to remember passwords. I have like 300 different passwords stored in my password manager. I can never remember all those. And use two-factor authentication basically anywhere that's possible. And if you can, encourage other places to add two-factor authentication. Encourage your bank to add two-factor authentication, to add that extra layer of security. So the other A is, or the second A, is authorization. And authorization, used in conjunction with authentication, is verifying that you have permission to do the thing that you're trying to do. So I'm trying to access a file, or I'm trying to access a page on Reddit. Now, Authorization says, does this person have permission to do the thing that they're trying to do? Why does it have to be paired with authentication? Because you have to know who a person is before you can verify that that person has access to the resources they're trying to access. That could include printing. That could be just viewing a website. That could be a lot of things. Accessing files on a file server. Or maybe you give people read access to files, but not write access to files. So they can view files. And in fact, a lot of websites have that. I have permission to read a lot of websites. I don't have permission to write very many of those. Executing commands. And really, anytime you have someone performing an action, you want to verify that that person has the permission to do that action. And that is the second A, authorization. So if you fail that authorization check, then you should get some sort of message that says you're not allowed to do it. The last A, accounting, and maybe also the fourth A of auditing, these are logs, and these are so important. The accounting, it's not referring to money, financial accounting. What it's referring to is basically being able to account for who is making changes, who is accessing a machine, who is using resources, who is doing things, and when and where. So these logs, and a lot of server applications have these logs, and you should have those logs enabled so that you can verify things. You can check on things. So it tracks who accesses what resources, when, what time, how long they're viewing those resources, from where are they doing it, and it's important for keeping track of things while it's going on. It's also important to figure out if something goes wrong, to be able to trace it back and figure out what went wrong. Without logs, a server goes down and you have no idea why. All you know is that the server went down and it's back up now. You can't go back and say, hey, what went wrong? What application caused this to happen? What time did it go down exactly? You need those logs to figure out and piece together what went wrong. So the 3 A's again: authentication, authorization, accounting. And authentication is verifying you are who you say you are. Authorization is verifying that you can do the thing that you're trying to do. And accounting is keeping track of everything that you're doing and everything that everybody is doing. And that's our 3 A's.